Thank you and good afternoon, and I'm conscious I sit between you and lunch, which is often the case with this slot. It's either immediately after lunch or immediately before. So thank you for the invitation to present here, and as I asked, could it be called a different perspective? So firstly, I wanted to focus on what is precision medicine, because if you search the dictionary or you search online, the words that come out and the definitions are not words that the average person in the street would understand. But in plain English, we use it as the importance of getting the right treatment to the right patient at the right time for their own condition, which, as you've already heard in the sessions this morning, those conditions are not just one label or one disease. Each disease or each condition is multifaceted, and actually even within disease groups they're really, really heterogeneous. So at what point do we mean it's targeted? Well, as you've heard even in that liver disease, that it's different parts in the pathway, and do we get it earlier, later, whatever the condition is. But I'd also like to make a little bit of a plea. So in the same way about changing the name, could we change some of the language? The suggestion, if this is precision medicine, is that we've got imprecise medicine now. That may be what we have, but it's probably not what patients and the public want to hear. So I wanted to give a little bit of context here about cancers. So all cancers, the outlook, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the latest CR UK stats, that 1 in 2 people in the UK is likely to get a cancer of some type during their lifetime. That's the most accurate forecast at the moment. It's 1 in 3. But actually, obviously, the survival curves have also changed. So 50% survive 10 years now after diagnosis and treatment, and the aim is to try and get that to 75%. So there's growing demand. People think we've got far more cancer now. Well, in a way we have, because we're living longer, but it's also to do with the progress that's been made into other conditions like infection, and cardiac disease means that more people are getting cancers. But that doesn't necessarily mean more people are dying from cancers, which is not what the adverts for the charities would have you believe if and when you get a diagnosis. So more than 4 in 10 cancers could be prevented by lifestyle changes, as we've already heard on the penultimate session, was that actually lifestyle is driving a lot of this. So we need the infrastructure to tailor patients' treatment based on their molecular makeup. And one of the things we're all consciously aware of are the pressures, both within the NHS, academia, and every other public service, that we can't waste resources. But the most important resource that we can't waste is patients' time, particularly when they have diseases that have really bad trajectories. We don't want to give them treatments that don't work, and we don't want to waste their times on those sorts of things just because that's common practice. So there's been a policy and there is a move towards precision medicine in cancer. Some of you may or may not have heard of Cancer Research UK's Stratified medicine programme too. So it's a 2-part solution to address the key operational challenges. What happened was there an earlier study looked at, which you can read in the abstract that I put into the programme, looked at the common cancers. And they decided to address lung cancer as being a cancer of unmet need. And I was intrigued to hear about the thing about the liver disease, because there is huge stigma around lung cancer. It's one of the most stigmatised diseases and conditions that there is. So really important. So they decided to pick on CR UK decided to pick on SMP2 on lung based on the responses in the first part of the Stratified medicine programme that they invested in. The study is led out of the Birmingham University, and the principal investigator is Professor Gary Middleton, who speaks internationally on that subject. I am not a scientist, so I'm not going to go into all the science behind this, but it is a really, really important, groundbreaking and exciting global study. So why is that? Because unlike the other cancers and the major cancers, lung cancer survival remains low. Lung cancer is the largest killer cancer in both men and women in the United Kingdom and also in a lot of the Western world, which most people don't recognise because of the publicity behind prostate and breast, which are the most prevalent, but they're not the biggest killers. People lose sight of where we could be making some huge difference. So what was done with stratified medicine programs? So you will be familiar with studies where we have a diagnostic biopsy. This is the current pathway across the top. So we have a single gene test where we're testing the genomics, the genetics within the tumour. We then push people into the NHS treatment. We get their consent. Hopefully we've got their consent before we give them the treatment, but actually this is their slide. Consent for a study. And if the test is negative, we have a single gene test for a study and we recruit if positive. So this is identifying the different genomic aberrations within lung cancer. So what's different about SMP2 from a traditional trial? So first of all, it's a national coordinated approach. This trial is operating within the NHS. It's using up residual and leftover tissue. It's not taking extra samples from patients. So it's not wasting time, and it's actually coordinated. Rather than a single consent, a generic consent is obtained from patients. So this is a multi-arm trial. And a panel test hopefully is there. Panel test is done on the genetics of this to determine all sorts of biomarkers. And then because it's a multi-arm trial, we have different treatments that we can push patients into. But what does that also mean? That means it's really attractive for pharma partners because we've got shared cost. It's quicker. It's easier for patients. If they're not responding to one type of medication, they're taken off. And we have fewer re-biopsies. Biopsies of the lung is very painful and really difficult to do. So this is a really important trial. So why lung cancer? Well, I've given you a few headlines. And surgery actually is one of the few curative treatment options with a profound bearing on survival. But we're waiting for liquid biopsies and other ways of testing people. The way we would make the biggest inroads into improving lung cancer outcomes is to detect it earlier. A lot of discussion and debate about screening, because one of the things that was found in recent studies is that there are huge groups, particularly of women, but not exclusively, with particular types of mutations who have never smoked, who would never become part of such screening programs. So again, really important to use stratified medicine to look at precision medicine about these different cohorts where it could even be different disease. So we've got significant improvement by the trusts where we've got specialist centres, more surgeons, good data collection. In some trusts, we've got very poor clinical participation. So postcode lottery goes on everywhere in the different diseases. So really important that we can improve this by spreading the spread of this trial and its therapies more widely across the UK. So the lung cancer context for precision medicine is also that nihilism is still quite high, and particularly in primary care. Many of these patients present in primary care but are treated with cough medicines or sent away, pain medication for bad backs, bad shoulders, not actually recognising what some of the symptoms of lung cancer are. Hardly anybody coughs up blood, and yet that is one of the markers. So we really need to look at differently what are the symptoms and raise awareness in the public. We've got huge excitement around immunotherapy, targeted therapies, and repurposing treatments from what we know of other cancers. But what we have got is massive, world-renowned cancer registries in lung cancer, National Lung Cancer Audit, that is really well respected. And we've got huge, great studies going on, but we have got some of the worst patient outcomes in the world. So there's a real dichotomy there around translating what we know about these diseases into clinical practice, which for me is why stratified medicine is so exciting, because it's in an NHS context, it's using tissue, it's not asking patients to go back through getting re-biopsied several times over. So the patient perspective, and I think what's really important with lung cancer, but also cancer patients generally, is the science is really exciting, but most patients are not interested in that at the time of diagnosis. They're actually reeling from even hearing the word cancer. And in their brains, unless they're familiar with cancer and the fact that it's more than 200 different diseases, and then even within their different layers, that they are fearing that they're going to die. because that is the message that many of the charities and many of the soap operas or whatever it is that they're familiar with or many of their relatives have experienced. They're not scientists, they're not medical experts, so many of them will be waiting for their clinician to make recommendations to them. And they're also not usually aware it's their own body turning against itself, and that's what makes treatment so difficult. But they do know some things, and those things need taken into consideration. So they understand that very clever people are working on very complicated issues in laboratories to understand how cancer works. And the more we're researching lung cancer, the more we're realising this is many, many different diseases. And actually the tumour burden is totally different amongst smokers to non-smokers. What is also exciting around lung cancer is finally, 7 years ago, less than 5% of cancer research money was actually spent on lung cancer because of the belief that it was a self-inflicted disease. What we've started to see is that that isn't true. There are huge, as I say, cohorts who have never smoked, but even if it is true, almost every other disease that we treat and we detect are lifestyle-driven, and we don't give them the same response or the same stigma. So really important that people understand both their responsibility in their pathway, but also that clinicians don't unnecessarily stigmatise the disease. What it's led to is a global race, because if we can get patients earlier and get them to survive, this could have the greatest impact on economic benefit and quality of life for patients of almost any cancers. It already kills more than most of the cancers put together, so really important research. So what do actually patients want? Working with patients is that many of them, and again, this is common across many cancers, is that they want timely access to the right diagnostics and the best treatment for their condition. It's no good having clinical pathways designed to be in a certain timescale if actually waiting for chest X-ray results or scan results takes 2 weeks and could never hit that timeline. So really important that even if they want pathology tests done, that the samples are turned around in sufficient time to meet those targets. They also not only want but expect it to be free of charge. They want it to be risk-free or limited risks. They want to understand what those risks are. And also many of them are in different states of health, either with different comorbidities. And so the ability to travel and how far they have to travel to take part in trials is a really important factor. When people have lung cancer, they're often breathless. So getting on multiple forms of public transport or taxis or having somebody take them may be a very different decision to somebody going to check a mole out or a lump in a breast. It's a different disease. So we have to really take that into consideration. We must have clear and effective communication in ways that patients understand. And what most importantly is that patients want to be listened and cared for, and preferably to tell their story once. They want continuity of care. That may not always be possible, but the idea that people have to keep repeating the stories means that they change their story or may not remember. And also we all get excited about the science and the heterogeneity of the science, and then we lump patients together as if there's just one category of patients or all patients are the same. So we have to remember that patients are different. They're individuals, and the viewpoint of somebody in their 70s or 80s with something like lung cancer may be very different from somebody in their 40s and 50s. So the other thing that patients want is that they want the treatments to be available. They don't want to read about them in the paper and then be told they're 15 years away. They want prompt timing of whatever the treatment is or the tests. They also want to know about the potential impact of taking part in clinical trials or the treatment. So we've heard about itch on one of the other treatments. So some of the side effects of some of the trial arms are really quite bad. And so they need to know, honestly, what does that mean? Having somebody say this is a grade 3 response wouldn't mean anything unless somebody saw pictures or films of what that might mean to them. And is there any point in taking part in trials to get a few extra weeks' life if that's going to be spent with constant diarrhoea on a toilet? I'd suggest not. So really important to understand what those side effects are before we're consenting people. Some want to know lots of detail, but at the time of diagnosis and first treatment, many don't. And so the people asking questions are not the patients, they're the relatives who are doing all their searching online and trying to pester the clinicians into getting different treatments. But mostly what patients want is to be treated as a person, not a condition. And I attend many conferences these days, and I'm often shocked at how researchers see patients, because all I see are slides, slides of tissues, scans, CT scans, X-ray results. But we forget that they're people. The lady on the right, Lynn Barrington, was a CNS for GI cancer, a cancer nurse, clinical nurse specialist, who had a cough that colleagues commented on, but it took her 18 months to get a diagnosis, by which time she was told she'd got stage 4 and 6 months to live. Through stratified personalised medicine, she survived 4 years, 4 months, which at the time was quite a record. She did sadly die, but she was a real person with real hopes, dreams, working, and as I say, a never smoker with one of the common mutations, EGFR. So I just wanted to raise today some considerations that's really important on stratified medicine. So we need to make sure that patients understand what they're being told. So the terminology that's used has to be lay understandable, lay-friendly, really, because we use these words interchangeably: precision, targeted, personalised, stratified, as if there's something different. If they are different, then those definitions need to be clearly spelt out. It's really important that patients understand that they don't get the headlines wrong and think that just because somebody else has got the same cancer, that the treatment that Nellie is having would work for them. And really important that the message is pushed for them to work with their own clinicians around their own tumour. The other thing is to look at the affordability. So on the one hand, it's the affordability of new treatments, but can we afford not to improve cancer outcomes? And we have to ensure that trials and new treatments are not just worked in isolation, but that basic care isn't actually deteriorating. There's no point investing in all of this if we haven't got enough nurses and doctors in the hospitals in the first place. So this has to be a really combined effort. And it's complicated. I'm not going to go through all these slides, as I recognise that I'm keeping you from lunch, but there are some further considerations and expectations and concerns. So we have to make policymakers aware that the goalposts are changing, and also the whole issue around data sharing and its use into trials is really, really important for us to make progress, and that the payment frameworks need to change. We can't have treatments being approved in scientific trials if they would never be afforded within the NHS. So we've really got to look carefully at study design. So lots of things need looking at, including staffing and the cancer outcomes framework and the access to diagnostic. But we've also got to look at the psychosocial aspects of cancer and various other illnesses. Mental health is supposed to have parity of esteem and be treated just as equally as the clinical and physical aspects. I don't see that at all in cancer. So not everybody, as I've already said, views their diagnosis or their treatment in the same way. So we've really got to ensure that the investment, and we get our best bang for buck, and ensure that personalisation is here and is here to stay, but we need to ensure that those investments are in the right place. So why am I standing here? I'd like to acknowledge all the different committees and the people who've supported me in my journey. So in 2006, I was appointed as a lay director by the Secretary of State into a primary care trust as a director. And then in 2010, had my own diagnosis. And I stand here as a never-smoking lung cancer survivor, thankfully. So I now take part in various committees on behalf of all those people that sadly we have lost, and on behalf of all those people unable to voice their concerns. This is not a rare disease, but this is a disease where not many people survive, and those who do not use their voice to best effect. So I hope, if nothing else, I leave you with some concerns and considerations for lung cancer patients in the future. Thank you.